Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something pretty mind-bending, quantum mechanics.
Right. It's this theory that, well, it works incredibly well for predicting things at the smallest scales. The math is just stunningly accurate.
Stunningly accurate, yeah, but what does it all mean? That's where everyone starts disagreeing, right? Scientists, philosophers. It's been a debate for almost a century.
Exactly. You've got the math framework, solid as a rock, but then you ask, okay, paint me a picture of reality based on this math, and suddenly you have like a dozen different paintings. Copenhagen, many worlds, Bohmian mechanics.
All these different interpretations, and they're not just small tweaks, are they? They touch on huge questions about reality itself.
Absolutely fundamental questions.
Uh-huh.
Is there objective reality?
Yeah.
Is randomness real? Can things be connected instantly across space?
And we've been trying to sort these out using the usual labels: realism, determinism, locality, all that stuff.
Yeah, those philosophical boxes.
But as Carlos Perez points out in his work on a new cartography for these interpretations, those boxes haven't really gotten us closer to an answer. We're kind of stuck in these loops, almost like the Bohr-Einstein debates all over again.
That's what's so interesting about Perez's approach. He's suggesting we need a completely different map. Forget the old labels for a minute.
Okay. So what's the new map based on?
It's called Rheomodal Quaternion Process Theory, or RM-QPT for short. And the core idea is, well, it shifts the focus. Instead of asking what things are, it asks what things do. It's about process, flow, action.
Huh. A verb-centered approach to quantum mechanics instead of nouns.
Precisely. Instead of getting bogged down in, is it a particle? Is it a wave? RM-QPT says, let's look at the process of measurement, the process of interaction. It draws a bit from thinkers like David Bohm, who talked about these deeper process-like levels of reality.
The implicate order, right? Stuff happening beneath the surface we see.
Exactly. So RM-QPT tries to give us a language, a structure to talk about these things that the standard quantum math often leaves, well, implicit.
Like what specifically? What does it make explicit?
Things like the primacy of process over static objects, the relationship between potentiality and actuality. Bohm's implicate and explicate orders, basically.
Wow.
The idea of wholeness, like how connected is everything. And something really intriguing, self-reference.
Self-reference in quantum mechanics. Okay, now I'm really curious. So the mission here is to use this RM-QPT lens to look at all those familiar interpretations.
Yeah, and see what happens. Does it shake things up? Does it show us connections or differences we missed when we were just arguing about realism or determinism?
The hope being we get some aha moments by mapping the territory differently.
That's the idea. Perez's work suggests this focus on process, on the implicate-explicated dynamic, on wholeness, and especially on this self-reference capacity. It reveals a structure that the old categories just couldn't capture.
So it's not just about particles and waves anymore, but about how these interpretations handle flow, potential, connection, and maybe even observation itself.
Right. How do they frame the activity of the quantum world?
Okay, let's dive in. If we put on these RM-QPT glasses, what are some of the unexpected groupings? Perez hints that some interpretations we thought were poles apart might actually be closer than we realized.
Well, one of the biggest surprises is how it brings Cubism and the relational interpretation together.
Really? Cubism, which is all about the observer's personal beliefs and updates.
Yeah, the agent's subjective experience is key there.
And the relational view, where quantum states only exist relative to another system, an observer.
Right, it's all about the relationships. On the surface, they seem quite different, philosophically.
Definitely. So how does RM-QPT connect them?
It sees them both as fundamentally prioritizing process. For both, quantum mechanics isn't about describing some independent, static reality out there. It's about the process of interaction, the process of gaining information, the process of measurement. That shared verb-centered view is the deep link.
Wow, so the focus on doing overrides their different takes on subjectivity or relativity. That's a perspective you totally miss if you were just asking, are they realist?
Exactly. The old categories obscure that shared foundation in process.
Okay, that's genuinely surprising. Are there other strange pairings like that?
Another fascinating one is the transactional interpretation and Bohmian mechanics.
Okay, hang on. Transactional involves waves going forward and backward in time, like a handshake, right?
That's the one. Offers and confirmations. Very dynamic.
And Bohmian mechanics posits actual particles with definite positions, guided by this hidden quantum potential. Seems almost deterministic, very different feel.
On the surface, yes, very different pictures.
Yeah.
But RM-QPT Looks at their underlying structure regarding potentiality and actuality.
They implicate and explicate orders again.
Right. Both interpretations, in their own ways, describe a continuous process guiding how potential becomes actual. In transactional, it's the handshake completing. In Bohmian, it's the quantum potential guiding the particle. There's a shared structural dynamic of a guiding, unfolding process.
So despite the vastly different narratives, the RM-QPT analysis finds a common pattern in how they handle the unfolding of reality from potential.
Exactly. A similarity in the process dynamics.
Okay, this is definitely a new way of cutting the cake. What about knowledge? Does RM-QPT say anything about how interpretations treat what we can know?
Yes, that's a really key dimension. Perez highlights using what he calls meta-epistemic operators, basically tools for analyzing the knowledge claims within each interpretation.
Meta-epistemic.
Right.
So thinking about knowing.
Yeah, thinking about the limits of knowledge. RM-QPT reveals that interpretations cluster based on whether they fundamentally accept that there are limits to what we can know about quantum reality, versus those that implicitly or explicitly assume we can, in principle, know everything.
So it's not just about what is, but what we can know about what is. And this creates different groupings than, say, realist versus anti-realist.
Completely different groupings, yeah. It cuts across those old lines. Some realist interpretations might acknowledge knowledge limits, while some non-realist ones might imply complete knowability within their framework. It's a fascinating angle.
It is. And you mentioned earlier that RM-QPT helps analyze how they deal with classic quantum weirdness, like wave-particle duality.
Definitely, you can see really different strategies. Some interpretations try to, resolve the tension. It's fundamentally a particle or a wave, and the measurement just reveals one.
Like picking a side.
Sort of. Others, maybe like the transactional view, kind of embrace the tension as part of the process itself. The wave and particle aspects are both involved in the transaction.
Okay.
Then you have many worlds, which basically says, why choose? Both happen, just in different universes. It multiplies the reality to avoid the duality.
Resolves it by explosion, almost.
Yeah. And then others, like relational or cubism, make the appearance of wave or particle relative to the observer or the context. So RM-QPT lets you map out these different philosophical strategies for dealing with the same core quantum puzzle.
It really exposes the underlying assumptions.
Yeah.
You also mentioned it reveals different attitudes towards time. That sounds fundamental.
It is. Radically different attitudes. Some interpretations, like many worlds, end up painting a picture of a static block universe. All of time exists simultaneously in this vast mathematical structure. There's no real flow, just branching.
A static reality despite apparent change.
Right. But others, like the transactional interpretation and RM-QPT itself, really lean into time as a dynamic flow. Process requires time to unfold. It's built in.
And others might sort of split the difference. Maybe time works differently at the quantum level versus our classical level.
Exactly. You see interpretations where the underlying quantum math might be timeless, but the experienced classical world has a definite arrow of time emerging from measurement or decoherence. So RM-QPT really brings these different temporal philosophies to the surface.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just about physics, it's deep philosophy of time, too. Now, Perez also introduced a new typology for the observer, right? How the observer fits in.
Yeah, another really insightful breakdown. Instead of just asking, is the observer special? RM-QPT looks at how the observer is integrated. 4 main ways emerge.
Okay, what are they?
First, the external observer. Think classic Copenhagen, where there's a clear cut between the quantum system and the classical observer measuring it from the outside.
The standard view, almost.
Pretty much. Second, the embedded observer. Here, the observer is just another physical system within the quantum world, subject to the same rules. Think many worlds, where the observer also splits.
No special status.
Right. Third, the participant observer. This is where interpretations like Cubism or RM-QPT itself fit. The observer isn't passive. Their actions, their choices, their experience are integral to the quantum event itself.
Actively shaping what happens.
In a sense, yes. And fourth, the relational observer. This is the relational interpretation. The observer isn't just participating, they act as a necessary reference point. Quantum states are defined relative to the observer in that specific interaction. Reality is relational.
External, embedded, participant, relational. That's a much more nuanced picture than just observer-dependent or not.
Exactly. It captures the different roles observers play across the interpretive landscape.
And this connects back to that idea of self-reference capacity you mentioned earlier. That seemed really important in Perez's analysis.
It's crucial. Because once you start talking about observers, so like participants or relational ones, you edge towards questions of knowledge, experience, maybe even consciousness.
Ah, okay. So can the interpretations framework even allow for a system, like an observer, to refer to its own state or actions?
That's the question. RM-QPT provides a way to assess this. Interpretations like Cubism, built around the agent's experience, or relational, with its network of perspectives, seem to have a high capacity for this kind of self-reference built into their structure.
They have the tools to describe a system reflecting on itself.
Right, whereas interpretations like many worlds with its static universal wave function, or Copenhagen with its strict classical quantum divide, seem to have a much lower capacity. They struggle to naturally accommodate self-referential loops.
And that has huge implications, right? If an interpretation fundamentally can't handle self-reference, how could it ever hope to explain something like consciousness, which seems inherently self-referential?
Precisely. Perez argues this dimension, the capacity for self-reference, might be a key differentiator, potentially separating interpretations that could, in principle, accommodate conscious observers from those that likely cannot. It's a profound point.
It really is. It shows RM-QPT isn't just reorganizing things, it's uncovering these deep, maybe even decisive philosophical fault lines.
Yeah, fault lines related to process, time, knowledge, and the very nature of observation itself.
Okay, so after applying all these new dimensions process, implicate, explicate, wholeness, self-reference, observer integration, Perez identifies 8 distinct clusters or philosophical regions. Can you give us a quick tour of this new map?
Sure, it's quite a different landscape. Let's run through them briefly. First, process holism. This includes RM-QPT itself and, maybe surprisingly, the transactional interpretation. What links them is this strong emphasis on process, the implicate-explicate dynamic, wholeness, and high self-reference.
Okay, process is king there.
Second, process relationism. This is basically the relational interpretation.
Huh.
Still process-focused, but it uniquely uses observer-relative relations instead of a strong implicate-explicate structure. Still high self-reference.
Got it. Process-via relations.
Third, process subjectivism. That's Cubism. RM-QPT highlights its unique focus. Process centered entirely on the agent's subjective experience. Very high self-reference, naturally.
Process through the individual.
Fourth, pattern formalism. This groups things like consistent histories and some information-based views. RM-QPT sees them as having a medium emphasis on process, but the real focus is on consistent patterns, rules, and framework dependence.
Less about flow, more about structure.
Kind of, yeah. Fifth, implicate realism. This is Bohmian Mechanics. Strong on the implicate-explicate distinction, deterministic guidance, high wholeness, but maybe surprisingly, RM-QPT rates it lower on process dynamics in the explicate world and low on self-reference.
Interesting contrast there.
Sixth, mechanism realism. This is where objective collapse theories fit, like GRW. They propose physical mechanisms for collapse, medium process emphasis tied to that mechanism, but low wholeness and low self-reference.
Focused on the collapse event.
Seventh, measurement dualism. The classic Copenhagen interpretation. RM-QPT really underscores its sharp quantum classical divide at measurement, low emphasis on process outside measurement, low wholeness, low self-reference.
The old standard, clearly marked.
And finally, eighth, static universalism. This is many worlds. RM-QPT highlights its static mathematical nature, rejection of implicate-explicate flow, universal wholeness but fragmented observers, branching not process, and low self-reference capacity.
A static block, as you said. Wow, laying it out like that. It really does rearrange the familiar landscape. You see connections and distances that the old realism determinism axes just don't capture.
Absolutely. And Perez's point is that this new map reveals that the quantum interpretation debate is fundamentally philosophical. It's about our core assumptions about reality, yes, but also about knowledge, time, process, and consciousness.
And it seems timely, too. You mentioned a trend towards process thinking in quantum foundations.
There definitely is. People are increasingly exploring dynamic, process-oriented views. So RM-QPT fits into that broader shift. And maybe, just maybe, frameworks like this could open up paths for dialogue, even synthesis, between camps that seemed totally opposed before.
By finding common ground at the level of process or structure.
Potentially. It helps bridge the gap, as Perez puts it, between the how, the math, and the what it means, the philosophy, the picture of reality.
So wrapping this up, our deep dive into Carlos Perez's new cartography using RM-QPT really gives us a fresh perspective. It's a new lens focusing on process, wholeness, the hidden becoming manifest, and self-reference.
And through that lens, The familiar interpretations rearrange themselves in surprising ways, highlighting unexpected similarities and fundamental divides we might have overlooked.
It challenges those old categories we've relied on for so long.
It really does.
And it leaves us and you, the listener, with a really provocative thought. What happens if we take this emphasis on process, on verbs over nouns, seriously? Not just for quantum mechanics, but maybe for other areas of science, philosophy, even just how we experience the world day to day.
What does reality look like if you view it not primarily as a collection of static things, but as a dynamic, unfolding, interconnected flow of actions and events?
A truly verb-based reality, something to chew on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.